I love Chris Philp. I really do. Every time he stands up, he makes a fool of himself and gives us some great content to watch. Because the Tories now think that they can get away with saying the Rwanda scheme was just deterred people from crossing the English Channel, it was all going to be great, and it's all your fault because you cancelled it. That kind of angle, they're still going in hard on it. They seem to forget how much it cost before they even sent anybody over there. 700 million. And they just happened to forget how much it was going to cost per person to send over there, which is around about 1.6 million. He also thinks that 5 months into a new government, they should start comparing figures. As you can see in the clip, he starts banging on about how numbers have gone up, but with something like this, it's not going to be an overnight fix. If they're serious about it, it's going to take time to get systems and processes in place. So I think really, you should be waiting until you've been there doing the job for about a year, because then you've got year-on-year stats. What I'd expect to see within the first year is either it levelling out or slightly increasing. What you then expect to see after that is everything then starting to shoot downwards, as by then you've got everything working at full capacity. However, as Yvette Cooper points out, they've already got one hard time behind their back because the law was changed in 2021 that allowed more people to come in. And guess who changed that law?
Now, the Home Secretary seems to have a great deal to say about the last government and rather less to say about her own record since the election. But fortuitously, there was a large release of data last week which gives us an insight into the first 5 months of her time in office. And having looked at that, I can see why she is so silent on her own record. Let me start with small boats. It has been 150 days up to yesterday, since July the 4th, and in that time, a staggering 20,110 people have made the dangerous, illegal and unnecessary crossing. Over 20,000 since this government was elected. That is an 18% increase on the same 150 days last year, and it is a staggering 64% increase on the 150 days immediately prior to the election. Now, why is it that the numbers have gone up so much? Well, let's turn to what the National Crime Agency have said about this. They said no amount of funding or action against people smugglers will end crossing on its own. They went on to say, and I quote, "You need an effective removals deterrence." Now, the Labour government, after it was elected, cancelled that deterrent. They cancelled that Rwanda deterrent before it had even started. The first flight was due to go off on the 24th of July this year, but they cancelled it. And had that flight taken off as planned, we would not have seen the 64% increase that we have seen since the election, exactly as the National Crime Agency foresaw. But it's not just me, it's not just the National Crime Agency. Even Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, has called for European member states to implement an offshore processing scheme, a proposal which 18 European member states are said to support. So my first question is this: will the Home Secretary support and agree with the National Crime Agency and do what Ursula von der Leyen has urged and re-establish the scheme? Because as a consequence of her failure to reduce small boat numbers, the use of asylum hotels, which they promised to end, has gone up by 6,066 in the 3 months following the election. And the asylum backlog, which she had a great deal to say about, has gone up by 11,000 in the 3 months following the general election, something she didn't find time to mention. If they're really serious about reducing net migration as we are, what we really need is a hard cap on the numbers, proposed by the Leader of the Opposition and I last week. So will they follow our suggestion and introduce that hard cap? So, Madam Deputy Speaker, behind all the bluster and all the chat about previous governments, we see her record and her government's record, a 64% increase in small boat crossings since the same period before the election, 6,000 extra people in hotels, the asylum backlog up by 11,000, all since the 4th of July. We see the deterrent, the Rwanda deterrent, which the National Crime Agency and even Ursula von der Leyen says is necessary, cancelled by this government before it even started. So I call on her to think again on those issues, to introduce those measures in April that the previous government announced, and introduce this hard cap. If she is serious about combating illegal migration and getting the net legal migration figures down, she will adopt those measures.
Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think if anyone believed that flights were going to go off to Rwanda this summer, the party opposite wouldn't have called the general election when they did. They would have hung on, hoping that it might happen, but it's just been the same thing time and again. They kept promising, they kept saying it was going to happen, but now everybody can see it was a total failure. It ran for over 2 years, and they kept promising the flights were going to go. They never did, but they just spent £700 million instead. They know so much, do they know, that this was a total failure. Their leader, their newly elected leader, won't even promise to reinstate it because she knows the whole thing was a con. And let me remind the Shadow Home Secretary too, the first half of this year, so the last 6 months of his government, crossings hit a record high for that season. If that trend had carried on, if that trend for the first half of the year for the record high had increased, had carried on through the summer, we would have had thousands more crossings that we would have been dealing with. Instead, because we had the increase for people arriving from Vietnam, this government introduced a major charter flight, return flight to Vietnam, and has been working with the Vietnamese government to make sure that those numbers from Vietnam can come down. We've also had to deal with a total collapse in their asylum decision-making that they left us with before the election, which has meant we have had to get caseworkers back in place that they had deployed elsewhere and let the backlog soar. But I would just say the Shadow Home Secretary then sort of wriggles a little bit around the net migration figures that have gone up to this record high, 900,000, because of the new rules that they brought in, that his government brought in 2021. Who was the Immigration Minister who brought in those rules? The Shadow Home Secretary.
Because they haven't got any bright new ideas and they don't really know which direction the party's going in, all they've got is to fall back on old failed plans, trying to claim that they were the ace in the hole. As you can see, Chris Philp here defending more of the Rwanda plan in the video that's on screen now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, and I'll see you next time.